Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. The Lakers season is officially over now that Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick addressed the media for exit interviews. We have a lot to get into. For those who were with me 9 hours ago, I appreciate you being back here. I'm running on less than 4 hours of sleep, and I apologize if I'm a little all over the place right now, but I'm going to try to collect my thoughts as best I can. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. As some are already noting, before we start, I want to address, rest in peace, Brandon Clark. Just a really tragic situation that we don't yet have any real details on, but my condolences to his family and friends and the Grizzlies organization. Just a really tragic situation. There's no easy transition out of that, but I'm going to transition now into today's press conference and what we learned. I will start with, if you took a shot for every time the word optionality was mentioned, you would be drunk right now, although optionality was only mentioned in the context of one question and one answer. That was from Dan Wojcicki of The Athletic. And he led with the term optionality and kind of riffed a little bit, made a joke of it. And then Rob answered with several optionalities. So for those keeping track of the optionalities at home, you'd be a little buzzed right now. But let's get into it. So I have 4 takeaways from today's presser, and took a bunch of notes and going to be going through that with mixing in what was said and my analysis on it. So I want to start with, I think the most important thing was the front office developments that we got updates on today. So Rob Pelinka said that the Lakers are hiring 2 assistant GMs. One is going to be more focused on player development and the draft and pro scouting, which I think is a really important area of the Lakers front office that they need to continue to revamp. And then the other one is going to be focused on salary cap, analytics, data. And so they are doing a wide search for both of those positions. They have begun interviewing candidates for those positions, but they are not yet close to making a hire. Rob said the goal would be to have those 2 positions in place by Summer League. They have made some hires to the front office that they have not publicized yet and that they are not going to publicize. So we'll get some updates on that at some point over the offseason or going into next season. And the group right now, that the front office outside of Rob, is in Chicago for the draft combine. Rob is going to be flying there tonight on a red eye after he conducts exit interviews with the players. And then also the Lakers are going to be renovating their practice facility, the UCLA Health Training Center, with the G League team relocating to Coachella Valley and now being out there. They have a bunch of extra space in the practice facility that they are going to be turning into new labs. So Rob mentioned a biomechanics lab, a movement lab, and a recovery lab. They're also going to be redoing the court. So it's going to be getting a makeover. And I think that's already seeing the impact from Mark Walter and the new ownership group in terms of investing in the front office, investing in moving the G League team, and then also renovating the practice facility. My take on all this is it's encouraging to hear that the Lakers are going to be adding not just 1, but 2 assistant GMs, and those will be the direct reports under Rob. I think it's also important that they are splitting it into 2 different roles, where one is going to be more focused on the scouting and drafting and pro personnel element, and the other one is going to be more focused on salary cap and how you navigate that, and analytics, and just modernizing the roster and the style of play on both sides of the ball. So I do think that those are multiple jobs, multiple hats, and it is good to see that the Lakers are not just hiring one person for all of those categories. It's going to be split. And I'm interested to see whether it's an internal hire or an external hire, or maybe one of each, or just how they approach that. But I thought that was the most encouraging thing of everything to come out of today, was that they are continuing to, like, they've already bolstered the front office. They are going to continue to bolster the front office, and they are all convening right now. Or, most of the front office is convening right now in Chicago, and then Rob will be joining them tomorrow. Second thing that I thought was important was them addressing their own free agents. I don't want to overreact or read too much into the situation, but I did think there was a difference in how Rob spoke about LeBron versus Austin. On the LeBron front, Rob reiterated similar sentiment to what he said before, which is that the Lakers will give LeBron space and time to think about what he wants to do next season, and they want to honor and respect his wishes with whatever he chooses in terms of whether he continues to play or where he continues to play. He did say, of course, quote, of course, any team, including ours, would love to have LeBron James on their roster. That's a blessing in itself, just with what he does. So I thought that was encouraging to hear. But I did notice when he transitioned to Austin, he immediately lit up. There was this big smile and energy, and I think more conviction in his answer, with regard to Austin's future and his standing with the Lakers. So I've been telling you guys all season that the Lakers want to keep Austin, and Austin wants to stay in LA. And I think that has been confirmed here over the past 24 hours. There was the report last night from The Athletic that confirmed that said there's the mutual interest, plus that Luka really values Austin and views Austin as a long-term piece and wants to keep Austin. And if the Lakers add another star, that he wants Austin to still be a part of that and not be outgoing in a potential trade for another star. So that we've seen that, I think, based on the last 12 hours or so. But then we had Rob Pelinka confirm that and confirm today that there is mutual interest, a strong mutual interest between the Lakers and Austin in finding some common ground this summer and him re-signing. Quote from Rob was, he said, "We want his odyssey to continue to unfold in the purple and gold." And then a couple sentences in between, and then finish it off with, "I think both sides made it abundantly clear that we want to work something out where he continues his prolific career here." So it sounds like Austin is going to be back, which again should not be news to anybody, but I think it's just going to come down to what that number and what that contract ultimately looks like. JJ asked about the big three, said, quote, "Of course we want that core back together." So there was a lot of talk about running it back, at least with those three. LeBron has a big say in all of this, with whether he wants to play next season or whether he wants to play next season in LA. And then the Lakers, of course, have their own say in terms of what type of contract they're going to offer LeBron. But it did sound like on the Austin front, it's very strong and clear, in my opinion, that the sides are trying to figure out what makes sense for both parties, and that there will be common ground there, and that they will come to a new contract this summer with LeBron. I think it's a little bit more complicated, but I think there's a lot up in the air in terms of just his future and what he wants to do. And then Rob was not asked about any other free agent specifically, but he was asked about Rui. And on the Rui front, he referenced Rui's growth in trust and comfort with the coaching staff and the front office. And he added that that's really, quote, "that's really important to keep those pieces." So I wouldn't say it was the strongest endorsement of keeping Rui, but I would say it did seem like the Lakers have been high on Rui. He's been a point of pride of the front office in terms of identifying him as an underappreciated asset in Washington, acquiring him, getting off of the Kendrick Nunn contract, not giving up a first-round pick in that trade, and then also developing Rui. And Rui talked about it last night at his exit interview, talking about just how he's really found himself in LA and that he's loved being here, and that he really figured out his game to a different level than where he was at in Washington. So I would say, overall, with the Rui and LeBron comments, I would say they were positive. I would say they were not as strong or as bringing endorsements as some of the Austin stuff. But again, I don't think that should be a surprise, because I've said Austin's going to be their top priority this summer in terms of their own free agents. And I think everything we saw from Rob and JJ just seemed to confirm that. And also the reporting that we got last night from The Athletic. Third thing is team needs. Now, this is obviously, it's important to beef up the front office. It's important to re-sign guys and keep the most important free agents, but it's also important to improve the roster. So on the team needs front, Rob did use the word optionality, as I mentioned at the top, but he said they will use that optionality with their cap flexibility to explore avenues in the draft, free agency, and trades to improve the roster. Now, that is straightforward and obvious. Those are the three ways to improve a roster, but that was sort of the overarching kind of takeaway in terms of like they're exploring all avenues, that they have not committed to an avenue necessarily. He did mention depth, youth, and athleticism as areas this Lakers roster needs to address, which I strongly agree with. He called those three categories or areas, quote, key North Stars for the roster. So I 100% agree. Lakers need to be deeper. They need to be younger. They need to be more athletic. And those are three areas they need to address this summer. He also mentioned that during the 16-2 stretch in particular, that Rui and Luke were really important with their shooting and how that opened up LA's offense. So that does seem to indicate shooting will be a big priority for them, whether that's keeping those guys, keeping one of those guys, adding more shooting. I think it's clear that like shooting is a big part, especially playing around stars. Like you need a certain amount of shooting offensively. Rob said that he and JJ are going to reconvene to, quote, deconstruct the roster, and especially looking at that 16-2 stretch, looking at like what worked, what didn't, and what's the best way to optimize a team around Luka, and what's the best way to optimize a team under JJ. And I think they're going to be looking for the qualities and the players that fit in that Venn diagram of who are the best Luka players, who are the best JJ players, what's the best synergy with that, and then moving forward, how do we build this out and what makes sense for both parties. JJ talked, and this was an interesting quote. This might have been the most interesting quote to me overall, just because JJ did not hold back what asked about. He was asked about if he wants a deeper roster to have a deeper rotation next year, and that he often used 8 to 9 players. But in contrast with OKC, would he rather have a roster where he could use 11 to 12 players in the rotation? And JJ said he'd love a deeper roster, and that roster depth is typically reflected in spots 10 to 15 on the roster, which sometimes you'll think about like how strong the top of the bench is. But I like wholly agree with JJ here that, and it's been a constant talking point for me on here, is that like the Lakers have just been subpar at spots 10 to 15 on the roster for years now, and that's a real area they have to address. And then JJ referenced OKC and San Antonio specifically and said that both teams have at least 13 high-level players on their roster. So I just thought that was interesting, him directly comparing the Lakers roster to two other specific rosters and saying that they're not deep enough and saying that they need to get deeper at spots 10 to 15 with Rob sitting 6 feet away from him. I just thought that was a interesting quote or comment from JJ, but it's 100% accurate. Like the Lakers need to be deeper. They are not as deep as the top teams in the West. I would still contend probably the shallowest team, like among contenders or top teams, you can make a case they have the shallowest bench of any of those teams, and they won because of their top 6 or 7 and primarily their star power. So that's something that they're going to have to figure out, and the coaching too. Something they're going to have to figure out this summer is like they need to be deeper. I would even argue spots like 9 to 15, maybe even 8 to 15, but certainly 10 to 15 has not been up to par these last few years. JJ also mentioned that they have to get much better defensively. They did finish 20th on the season in defensive rating. Now, they were much better, I thought, to close the season and in the playoffs. I think the defense was actually better than the offense in the playoffs. But he said that's not only a personnel thing, not putting that all on the roster, but also said it's a coaching thing, and that he and the coaching staff will reevaluate their defensive strategy this season and will continue to refine their approach. I think they're going to have they don't have the roster for the switching that they like to do. So I think they're going to have to tweak that a bit in terms of how much switching they do moving forward. And then he also said, quote, "We got to be better being able to dribble, pass, and shoot. I know that sounds simple, but that's just the reality." This is something I touched on last night when I talked about the Lakers' skill level in general. You saw whenever they were without Luka or LeBron or Austin or even Marcus or Luke, the drop off from like those 5 to the rest of the roster from like a ball handling and just skill perspective was precipitous. And they are going to have to address that as well, where I think they need more general skill and versatility and talent as well. But I think they just need some more skilled players within the rotation that you can trust to dribble, pass, and shoot, because that was not the strength of a lot of the roster. Rob, this is a great question that Rob was asked, and it was interesting to hear his take on it. He was asked about, like, so you are talking about potentially bringing back LeBron and Austin, but you also have other roster needs. Like, do you think you can achieve both? Do you think you can bring back LeBron and Austin at the numbers they will likely command and also improve the roster in a meaningful way? And Rob said yes, that he thinks with the tools that they currently have, with the cap space, with the picks, with the tradable contracts, like he thinks that they have enough. If you're looking at Luka, LeBron, Austin, he was like, we have 12 other guys, 12 other roster spots. That should be enough to build the type of roster we want. So I will say, to Rob's credit, there was not a lot of, there was the optionality, of course, but there was not a lot of sort of kicking the can down the road or like running it back. Like there was some, they believe in the core of this group, but he also, a big theme today was like proud but not satisfied. They were proud of the season. They were disappointed with how it ended. They wish they saw what this group was like healthy, but they also are not satisfied and know they are not a championship level roster yet. So I do think, in comparison to some of the other, I mean, this is now my 7th offseason covering this team. Like, in comparison to a lot of the previous ones, I would say the answers were better. Now, words can only carry so much weight. You have to actually go out and execute and take action on these things. But I will say I left their press conference more encouraged by some of the things that were said compared to previous off seasons or previous exit interviews. Rob also mentioned, he was asked a great question by Andy Kamenetsky about sort of LA always being in win now mode. But if you look at the best rosters in the NBA, they were largely formed by tanking and young draft picks. And you look at OKC and San Antonio and Detroit, and Rob acknowledged that like it is difficult to thread the needle of the Lakers are not OKC, San Antonio, or Detroit. They're not going to have a multi-year rebuild. That's just not how this organization operates. So it is challenging to not go that route and not have that blue chip young talent that you acquire through the draft that is on rookie scale contracts. But and also having those championship expectations of you're not really you can't really replicate the OKC, San Antonio, Detroit mold necessarily from how they build their rosters, but you also have to try to be on their level. And it is a delicate balance that the Lakers, I think, have clearly struggled to balance, but that's the challenge of the summer. And then final thing was Rob talked about ongoing conversations with Luka about what Luka thinks about the team and free agency and the offseason, what Luka wants, and that the Lakers are trying to do the best they can. Like their North Star, which is a popular term today, is building the best possible roster around Luka. And so Rob made it clear, like this is the Luka show. This is all about Luka. This is all about what Luka wants. Now he did, I think, back Luka up in terms of also saying like Luka's a great partner and this isn't Luka's way or the highway. Like that there is a conversation here, and Luka has been a great partner with the team and is collaborative, and like he wants JJ to coach the team. He wants Rob to be the general manager, and like he's not trying to do their jobs for them, but he is going to give them input, and they have that dialogue and conversation. And I will note, based on Luka's recruiting last summer and the value that the Lakers got in free agency with Marcus and DA specifically, and Rob talked about Luka has like a really deep understanding of the league and his opponents and like everyone's skill sets and fit. I think that could be another big asset for LA this summer, is Luka the recruiter and Luka the analyst, because so far I would say he's 1 for 1 in terms of nailing the offseason. And final thing that stood out to me was the talk about the young core. So it sounds like they're keeping the number 25 pick, or at least that's the current plan. That could obviously change depending on what trades materialize. But Rob is flying there tonight for the draft combine. They're going to be interviewing over 20 players for the number 25 pick, and then start to schedule the draft workouts in LA. As for the traits that they are looking for, Rob said, quote, that they are looking for game processors, that they're looking for highly competitive players, they're looking for players with high basketball IQ, and they're looking for team first players. So he said, quote, mindset is the first thing. That is more important than even skill or talent or athleticism or whatever, that they are really trying to focus on building a culture in LA and looking for guys who check those boxes of processing the game at a high level, having a high basketball IQ, being highly competitive, and being team first. And I think those are all great things to aspire for or aspire to. Rob also mentioned OKC finding AJ Mitchell in the second round and how LA has to do a better job of drafting and finding young talent, which I think that there's a level of accountability and self-reflection and self-awareness in that I think is important for this front office to acknowledge. Like, they have not done a good job of identifying young talent recently. They've done a poor job in the draft, the last few drafts. They have to do better. And he also referenced the Dodgers and how great they've been with player development as a model. And that's the standard that the organization is aspiring to. So overall, like, I thought there was a lot to like. I mean, there's the old sentiment of like winning the press conference. I would say they won the press conference to a degree, especially in comparison to some of the. So there's been some rough press conferences in previous off seasons and in previous exit interviews, and so in comparison to those, I think this was much better than that. But as I just said a few minutes ago, like, ultimately action is going to rule the day here. Like, you can say the right things, you can have the right strategy, you can map it all out, you can prep it, you can hire the right people, but what is going to be the most important thing here is the decisions they make this offseason. What do they do with the pick? Do they keep it? What type of player do they go after? What happens with LeBron? Where is the number that they are comfortable with paying him? What is LeBron looking for? What happens with Austin? Where does that number come in? What do they decide with Rui and Marcus and Luke and Jackson? What happens with DA and his player option? What do they do with the back end of the roster? Are they going to get off the contracts of Vando and Jake and Dalton and Nick Smith and Bronny? And like, how do they determine who do they keep and at what number and whatnot? So just a lot of moving parts. And then, I mean, that's before we even mention you could acquire second round picks or maybe trade up in the first round. You can trade players into your cap space. I talked about last night on the show, could you trade Vando and Dalton or just Vando for a player on a longer contract that the team doesn't really want, the team trading them? And it's sort of like you're getting to, that's a form of a salary dump. When we hear salary dump, we typically think of Vando plus a first, Vando plus X asset to get to a team. But can you acquire a starting level player and send out some salary you don't love, but maybe that team doesn't have use for that player or doesn't want that player on the books for 3 or 4 years, and you can leverage that to take on that player? Then you have free agency, and are the Lakers able to swing a restricted free agent? Are they able to find values in unrestricted free agency? Are they able to find values on the minimum market? Like, there's so many questions, so many moving parts right now, so much up in the air. But I thought I at least liked a lot of what was said today, which has not always been the case for me walking out of these press conferences, especially when it's, well, we just want to see, like, the whole run it back sentiment, the whole let's just see what we have it when fully healthy. We want to give this group another chance. Like, there was not that. I mean, even contrast this with last year coming out of the Minnesota series, there was a lot of, we feel like we could have been more competitive if we were healthy. We want to see what this group looks like. There wasn't really that. Like, they did acknowledge that they felt they had a championship level group had they stayed healthy, and that they had become that with that 16-2 stretch. And that they believe in the core of Luka, LeBron, and Austin together. But outside of that, it was a lot of, no, we need to get deeper. We need to get younger. We need to get more athletic. We need to invest in our player development. We need to invest in the draft. We need to invest in the front office. We need to invest in the facility. Like, all these things are important and are what take you from being a good organization to a great organization, take you from being just I think the Lakers are in a great spot right now, but they could be even better. They could be the organization of the NBA. Like, they have some clear built-in advantages with the market, with the history. Luke Kennard said it great last night, right? He's a guy who's bounced around several teams. He's like, the Lakers are the team of the NBA. Like, they are the stage in the NBA, and the Lakers have had that advantage for forever. But now I think if you can combine that advantage with a really strong ownership group, a really strong front office, a really strong coaching staff, and eventually, and hopefully this summer, a really strong roster, that's when you go to that level that I think, like, they have, in my opinion, the highest upside of any franchise in the league. It's just about actually getting to that upside and actualizing it, right? But with all that said, let's get into the questions here. Craig says, yo, what up, Craig? Hope you're doing well. Hope you all are doing well. Shout out to the chat and shout out to the late night gang. Kennedy82 says, I can't wait for the video about contracts and who'll still be here next year, coming soon. Yes, that is coming soon. I will be taking a little bit of a break over the next 24 hours. I will be sleeping. I will be doing some debaucherous things that I cannot share on this stream, but I will. I'm gonna unwind for 24 to 36 hours, and then I will be back. And I got a mailbag coming later in the week. We got another episode of Lakers Collective, and then I think starting next week, next week I'm going to start diving into the offseason stuff. I think my full offseason thing, I might want to take a couple weeks to really break it all down, do some charts and graphics and different things, and get into it. But we got over a month and a half to talk about all that stuff, 6 weeks or so. So I'm definitely going to be diving deep into that. Nick Costa says, must be exhausting talking about basketball. Not exhausting talking about basketball. It's more exhausting. For those who were on last night, I was live until 3 a.m. I was editing and working until after 4 a.m. And then my mind could not shut off until 5 a.m. And then I had to be up at 9 a.m. for the presser. So more so just the late night nature of all this. And especially at the end of the season, like I'll never forget the summer or the off season that they fired Frank Vogel. We had like the exit interviews that night, and then they had the final exit interview process at 9 a.m. back in LA, and we were in Denver, so we had to take like a 5 a.m. flight. So I basically pulled an all-nighter. That, like, I'm used to that. That's like the last night of the season. I basically don't sleep, but just need like a day break, and then I'll be back. JG time, Jovan, thanks for all you do. The passion is evident and real. Thank you. I appreciate that. Then Kevin Cambridge, my boy Buha getting hammered as F tonight. I'm not going to disclose anything, but I'll be having a good time. All right, let's get into super chats here. First one from 03 Dan Demand. Thank you for super chat. Yo. Cheers to another great year of great coverage and even better content. It'd be cool to see some NBA YouTubers on the channel like Legend of Winning, Get Like Coop, and Jimmy High Roller. Late Night Gang for L will be tuning in all summer. Thank you. That is in the works. I think one of the areas that I wasn't, I would say, similar to players that exit interviews and really reflecting on things. Like I want to expand my collab universe. And I think this year I try to focus more on having people on the show who I think are really knowledgeable and or have really good intel, and then also people I have a rapport with, people I have good chemistry with. And that's why you saw some recurring people like whether it was Kobe Price or Raj Chapalu or Istok Franco or just people like that. I wanted to focus more on having people that I just, I feel like I see the game with and we have really great conversations with. But I would say I went away from guests maybe as much as I would have liked to, and I didn't have a guest every week like I did last season. So that's a goal moving forward, and especially now that I'm going to be doing 2 Lakers shows a week, one solo, one with a guest. Like I want to get back to having more guests on, but whether it's Lakers content or NBA content or both, I do want to have some of the other big YouTube channels on for sure. But I appreciate it, and I will reiterate it for those who did not watch or listen last night. And just a big shout out to all of you for supporting the chat, the late night gang. This was my first year doing this completely independent. Like it is a point of pride for me that I've been able to build my career to this point where I could be self-employed, and not only self-employed, but still be credentialed, still be in the locker room, still be asking questions, still be traveling, and just doing what I want to do when I want to do it. And like that's the dream. That's how I've learned that about myself. I operate best as a solo operator. I don't like having a boss. I don't like being told what to do. And I'm more of a lone wolf. And that was confirmed this season. I did not miss being part of an organization and all that goes into that. So for me, like this ended up being a dream season. This went as well, if not better than I thought it was going to go when I took this leap. And the biggest reason for that is the audience and all of you continuing to tune in and watch and listen and support. And even the haters, even the I would say vocal minority in the chat that's always going at me. I appreciate you too, because you're still watching and listening. And I know deep down you at least agree with some things I say if you're tuning in. King Rifa _Chifa, thank you for the super chat. The most likely RFA plus UFA for us, Eason, LOL. Well, I've said, if you look at the RFAs, I mean, we could get into some of the free agent stuff now. I mean, we're going to talk about it basically every show moving forward. If you look at, so I'll pull this up here and share my screen. If we go through, so these are the unrestricted free agents, and this is their previous average annual value. I don't think any of these guys are realistic. Porzingis is kind of interesting. I think Golden State's going to try and keep him, and it would have to be at a much lower number. But Porzingis is an interesting one. There's some real health concerns with him, right? And just has not been available the last couple of seasons for a variety of reasons. But he has the history with Luka. It seemed like they had at time a little bit of tension, but it also seems like that's passed. But I don't have much insight into that as of right now. Isaiah Hartenstein would be a dream. I think that would be one of the best possible outcomes for LA. I just think between him and Dort, if I'm OKC, I have to prioritize Hartenstein. I think he's much more difficult to replace than Dort is. Tobias Harris is kind of like, he's interesting coming off the playoff run, but I just would prefer Rui to Tobias Harris. I think he's a younger Tobias Harris. John Collins at a much lower number. But yeah, now we're getting into not the great, not the best group. I like Mitchell Robinson. I like Robert Williams, Thibault, Grimes, Oubre, Dosunmu, but I think Minnesota is going to keep him, and that's going to be a pretty high number. That I would say if you're moving on from Austin, that can make some sense as a cheaper alternative, but otherwise I don't know if he necessarily fits, especially at the number he's likely going to command. Mathurin could be an interesting bench option depending on what happens with him in the Clippers. That's an RFA. I would say on the RFA front, it's probably Eason and maybe Mathurin. Although I would like a player who's a little bit more team first and defensive minded. There's the white whales of Kessler and Watson. Those are, and Duran, those are the three guys. So it's like, okay, if you could get one of those three, I think that would be great. I think it's unlikely, and all three of their respective teams are going to try to keep them. On the unrestricted free agent side, I would say Robinson, Williams, Grimes, Oubre, Gillespie somewhere down here. As a backup, I wouldn't mind Gillespie. Yeah, I mean, there's some hidden gems down here that, but if we're talking like bigger names, I think those are some of the biggest names out there. Like Tim. Well, I was going to say Tim Hardaway Jr. is a Luke Kennard replacement, but he might get more than Luke Kennard. So I'm just riffing here as I'm going through guys. Like Nick Clifford as an RFA is interesting, depending on if Sacramento fumbles that situation. But yeah, I would say really, I think that like I look at it through the lens of centers and wings. I think those are the two key areas for LA to address. So RFAs in no particular order: Kessler, Duren, Watson, Eason. I would want any of those four, assuming the price is reasonable. And UFA again, Robinson, Williams, Thibault, Oubre, Grimes, those types of guys. So I think those guys the UFAs are definitely far more realistic than the RFAs, with maybe the exception of Eason. And so I would say those are some of the names off the top of my head right now. Joe, thank you for the super chat. Do you think this offseason approach will be different with the new ownership group? I do. I think already we're seeing it with the revamping. Like the Lakers have not made substantial changes to the front office in years. And already we saw them remake the scouting department. And then now they've made some hires that we were not aware of. And they're going to be adding 2 assistant GMs. So I think if you just look at that alone, like the structure of the Lakers front office has not, you did have Jesse Buss in an assistant GM role previously. And, the Buss brothers were a big part of the front office. But I think this is shaking out to be a more conventional is actually the wrong word. I would say more modern front office with the way that it seems like they're going to be structuring it. So that alone to me changes things, right? But I think the deeper pockets with the front office are going to materialize in a variety of ways. And I think there will be some real urgency to improve the roster because as the Athletic reported last night, and I think it's just an obvious situation, like the Lakers are on the clock with Luka to some degree. Luka, well, I think on one hand, I'll use the term duality, which JJ loves to use, and it was a big talking point today. Like, on the one hand, I think Luka is a great partner and isn't someone who's necessarily going to twist an arm and apply a certain amount of pressure. Like the reality of the situation is he is up for an extension and supermax extension in a couple of years. And if the Lakers don't make meaningful improvements to the roster, you have to wonder if he starts to look around at some point. And if it is running it back or maybe making a small addition, a medium addition, and the Lakers lose in round 1 or round 2 next year, at that point, it's like, okay, well, even like there's a lot of context within this, but like putting the context to the side, just looking at the results, it's like first round exit to Minnesota, second round sweep to OKC, and then whatever the result would be next season. It's like I think you need to start making conference finals, winning championships at some point here in the next couple of seasons, frankly. And the way to get there is through the roster. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the ownership group and the front office to build that caliber of roster. It's not going to be easy. OKC's not going anywhere. San Antonio's not going anywhere. And there's a plethora of other young, really good teams, but that's the challenge at hand. Basketball, thank you for the super chat. Could we re-up Rui on Bird early to clear cap hold? Yes. So that, and there's a whole other way, like there's a version where the Lakers could run it back and just use everybody's bird rights and go over the cap and then be operating as an above the cap team. The issue with that is obviously it does limit, some of the trade stuff or some of the free agent stuff. Like you could open up that non-taxpayer MLE instead of the room exception, depending on how you operate. But the way they are a cap space team and are operating as a cap space team is by rescinding the rights to their free agents, and then they can still re-sign them, but it does clear up some flexibility under the cap to make certain moves. Whereas if you just keep the guys on the cap hold, you're operating as an above the cap team, and depending on where you're at, you could be a first apron team or even approaching the second apron, depending on how aggressive you get with re-signing guys and their contracts and whatnot. But most likely, I think the Lakers are going to be either quickly signing guys, like quickly signing a Rui or a LeBron, or depends on, like, Jackson is one where his cap hold's low enough. I don't know that they necessarily have to make a decision on Jackson quickly, but Rui, for example, his cap hold's around $28 million. Rui's not going to make $28 million. So it's like, if you're keeping Rui, it makes sense to either, you could either rescind the rights and then do your other moves and then fit Rui into it, or just immediately sign Rui at the beginning of free agency and be like, hey, we're keeping Rui at $15 million a year or $18 million a year, but whatever it ends up being. And now that's adding an additional 10 to 13 million in those examples in cap space, or cap flexibility, whatever. So that's definitely a way it could go down with Rui. It could go, you either rescind the rights and then do another move or two and then re-sign him, or you just re-sign him immediately, and that lowers that cap number on your cap sheet. Eric, thank you for the super chat. Could you rank the archetypes you think would fit best around Luka, such as 3-and-D wing, defensive center, etc., and where Austin's skill set fits in? Yeah, I would say that it's honestly, for me, like a tie between 3-and-D wing and defensive center. I think you can make the case that, like, that 2022 team, it was Dwight Powell and Maxi Kleber and DFS. And so it wasn't like the traditional rim protection or a defensive anchor that you would typically think of, or at least not along the lines of like a Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford. But even then, those guys have some mobility and athleticism that I would say Gafford is like the closest thing to a defensive anchor, where he's especially that season, was a solid rim protector, shot blocker, etc. But I think that they're both really important because, for different reasons. It's really for both sides of the ball, right? So the defensive center, which I would also argue is a rim running, rolling lob threat above the rim center, that is the bread and butter of the Luka pick and roll, the Luka offense. And we saw, whether it was DA or Jackson, that was such a big part of LA's success, and that threat of playing the cat and mouse game with the defense, depending on the pick and roll coverage. And if you are going to, if Luka gets downhill and the center cheats up, it's the lob, or it's the dump off, or if you're in drop and you're giving Luka the shot, he's going to hit the pull up or the step back, right? And so there's that constant pressure on the defense, but a big part of that is having a big man who can put pressure on the rim and put pressure on the defense, especially if they're switching, which DA did for the most part this season. But we also saw, like, the games where DA wasn't as strong, whether it was the catching or the finishing or whatever, or a team could neutralize him, you did see that start to wear on LA's offense. And so I think that's a really important piece, is like having a center with a high motor, a certain amount of athleticism, a high catch radius, good catching skills, good finishing skills, and then also being a certain level of rebounder and defender. But then defensively, like, the center spot is still really important defensively, but the 3-and-D wings, like with how much the Lakers switched, with how much those Mavericks teams switched, you just need a certain amount of defensive versatility and just, I think, guys who could defend down, guys that can defend up, guys that can defend a multitude of positions. That's a really important archetype. And then having a certain amount of shooting. And we've seen, whether it's Rui or Luke or Marcus and Jake, when they shot well, like, having guys who can space the floor and keep defenses honest is really important in a Luka offense. So I would almost go with like a tie between the two. I made the point the other day on Lakers Collective that I think it is easier to find bargain value with defensive centers than it is with 3-and-D wings. And I think just take the Lakers at the face value with that. Like, they did get some value out of the DeAndre Ayton, Jackson Hayes contracts, right? Now it was not championship level value. And clearly there's a gap between having those two guys as your center versus having some of the other centers at the top of the league. But I think you can find value at the center spot, whether it's through the draft or underpriced guys who maybe look better in a Luka system and play next to Austin and LeBron. I think it's much tougher to find 3-and-D guys. Like that is a premium positional archetype that the Lakers have been trying to find them since 2021, and they just have not really done it. Like I got, Max Christie, I think is the closest thing they've had to a true 3-and-D player. And he really was only optimized for like 2 months on that roster before being flipped for Luka. So the Lakers have been in search of that. And as they've shown, it's a really difficult thing to acquire in the draft or free agency or trade. Those guys like the Kamaras and Jaden McDaniels and those guys are rarely made available. And if they're available, they're often part of a package for like a big star. Otherwise, the asking price is astronomical. So I would say, in a way, like I think acquiring the 3-and-D wing, like a true 3-and-D wing, a guy who's a clear positive on both sides, because that's the distinction here. Where even Marcus, for as great as he was this season, was not always a positive offensively, was not always a positive as a shooter. He was always a positive defensively, but like fighting guys who can be guys in that 6'4" to 6'9" range who can defend multiple positions and be positives offensively, that can be few and far between. And you see whether it's San Antonio, OKC, some of the better teams in the league, they have multiple of those guys who, even if they're flawed offensively, like Alex Caruso, I think is a great example of, top 10 to 5 perimeter defender just straight up, but he is flawed offensively. Like he's not a guy you're going to run the offense through. He's not a guy that you really want like running pick and roll or trying to create off the dribble necessarily. But last night hits multiple big threes that keep OKC in the game early as they're kind of going through it offensively, and can get out in transition. How many big fast break dunks and plays did he have in this series? I would say Alex Caruso is a positive offensive player. He's not a well-rounded offensive player necessarily. He's not a flawless offensive player, but I would even compare, like he's also like much less mistake prone. Like if you're comparing like Alex Caruso to Marcus, like Marcus is a better ball handler, he's a better passer, he's a better shot creator, but Alex is also a much less mistake prone player, which like there's an efficiency element there that I think plays into his hands offensively, or even comparing him to like LaRavia or Vando. It's just, he's a much better offensive player than those guys. So I think that's the challenge for LA. And so I might go 3-and-D wing first, center second, but I really think at worst, it's like a 1A, 1B situation, if not just like both number one. I think you need both, and I think they need to adjust both. Where Austin fits in is in that secondary playmaker scorer role in terms of looking at, if you look at Luka's two most successful playoff runs, 2022 and 2024, Jalen Brunson played a certain role and Kyrie Irving played a certain role. And I'm not, for the upteenth time, I'm not saying that Austin is on that level. I do think he's at a higher level overall than Jalen Brunson in Dallas, not Jalen Brunson in New York. Jalen Brunson in Dallas was a different player than Jalen Brunson in New York. There are still people who are skeptical of him, skeptical of his contract. And so there's a lot of questions that he answered in New York in a major way, where he's now been a top 10 player for multiple years. But like that version of Jalen Brunson and then Kyrie, I would also argue is like his highs are I would still say higher than Austin's, but you look, he did, like, look at the OKC numbers for him versus the OKC numbers for Austin. And I think Austin, the best version of Austin, or the version of Austin that fits next to Luka, is that version of, he's got to shoot better. That's like the biggest thing for me, is he's got to be a better catch and shoot guy. You got to stay healthy. You got to withstand the grind of the season, got to keep his legs, etc. But assuming he can turn that corner and do that as soon as next season, the big thing is going to be his shot. And he's just not been the same level of a shooter in the playoffs. And I think it's a giant swing factor from a skill set perspective. next to Luka. So I think the idea with Austin is for him to be, I would say, especially if you're bringing LeBron back, I think in the biggest moments, Austin's the number 3 and LeBron's the number 2 and Luka's the number 1. But Austin's like the secondary ball handler, playmaker from the perimeter. LeBron is playing more out of the post or as a screener and roller, and then gets his bench units as we saw. But I think that's the way the Lakers are going to try to build this. But obviously a lot of time to see how it goes. Norma Maldonado, Buha, aka Mama Buha. Thank you for the super chat. Regardless of getting swept, I feel like there's much to celebrate for the Lakers. What a crazy season. They were the only California team in the second round of the playoffs. Please continue to support Yo XO Mama Buha. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, look, there's a lot for Laker fans to be happy about, not only winning that first round series when everybody counted them out, but you had the Clippers and Warriors miss the playoffs entirely. You had Denver and Boston losing round 1. I think for Laker fans, there's a lot to like in terms of the hate watch element. Purple Gold for life. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jovan, appreciate another season of great working coverage. Really like your shows. Thank you. I appreciate that. How would you grade JJ's year 2 of coaching? What areas would you like to see JJ improve on more next season? I would give JJ, I think I'd give JJ an A-. And I don't have a lot to really criticize him about in like a macro sense. I would say there's definitely micro adjustments or micro things I could find. I think in general, trusting the bench more and building out the bench. And the interesting thing was there was times he did it, right? Because I think about arguably the best example of the season was that game in Portland that the Lakers won in the first third of the season, like the Nick Smith Jr. game, where they're down everybody and the young guys step up. And that was largely out of necessity, right? Just based on who was available. He had to play certain players or play the young guys. But I think if we go back throughout the season, I think trying to develop a do at some point would have been nice. I think the progress we saw with Bronny, could you have had that progress with Bronny in the middle of the season rather than the end of the season? And like, what would Bronny have looked like at the end of the season or going into the playoffs? I think with Dalton, I think he gave him a shot to start the season, and it was really a continuation of last year of just not being the same level of shooter he was to start last season, and then still having some decision-making, processing, and defensive limitations. But I think that there's some stops and starts with the young player development. And I think that's an area he could certainly be better with, because I think about Drew Timme and like they found, I've made this point several times before, but like they found some success with the Drew Timme double big lineups and going zone. And they had success against that against Toronto. They had success against Denver, and then they just inexplicably went away from it. And I felt like JJ did do a better job this year of spamming things that work compared to last year. But there also were some times where he would try something, it would work, and then he would inexplicably go away from it. And I'm not like, of course, with Drew Timme, he's a two-way guy, so there's a limitation to how many games he could play. But I would still say there were games he was available for, or there's games he played in where they just changed the strategy for some unknown reason, when in the very small sample size of him as a bench player and him in the role that he was in briefly for a few games, like the Lakers crushed those lineups and they won most of those games. So I would like to see that continue and just, JJ develop the young guys a little bit more, have a little bit more trust in the bench in general, and look for more. I mean, this ties into some of the rest and workload and minute stuff I've talked about as well, of just like trust the bench will hold the lead for the fourth quarter. And if they don't, then like I would even like to see a game where you don't want to blow the game, but like I feel like we wouldn't even really see a situation in which the Lakers are up 18 to start the fourth and the bench blows it to like an 8-point lead or a 6-point lead or something, and they have to bring guys in. Like I think there's one game I'm forgetting where the bench blew it like pretty late, and they had to go back to the starters like midway through the fourth. But I would like to see like a couple more reference points with that before I just write off the bench entirely. And it felt like at no point this season did JJ really trust the bench to close a blowout game. Like it was like really deep into the fourth quarter when he'd start to trust the bench. So I'd like to see a little bit more trust with that. That goes back to even last year with the game 4 situation and just trusting and that's partially a roster thing, partially a depth thing. I think, clearly based on JJ's comments today, there's an element of like, he has not felt like the Lakers have had the requisite amount of talent and skill and depth. And I agree with him. I just think you also need to put the guys in the fire to some degree and like allow, especially when you see what Nick Smith does in a couple games, or you see what Bronny eventually becomes at the end of the season, or you see Kobe Buffkin had a couple flashes. That's why he earned the 15th roster spot temporarily. Like, you could trust those guys a little bit. And if it goes off the rails, it's a learning experience and you then recalibrate at that point. But I felt like there was times he was a little bit too cautious with the bench minutes or the bench closing a game. And it cost the team opportunity to get rest with some of the guys. That is probably my biggest gripe overall, is like a combination of not developing some of the young guys plus the lack of trust or reliance with the bench. Aside from that, I think defensively, we did see a real progress in both years in like the second half of the season. So I think I would like to see from JJ, like, what was it like? Was it a messaging thing or like a buy-in thing from the group, or was it takes a certain amount of time for him to really figure out the optimal way to use the team defensively? Because I would just say, like, we did see it in both seasons, where if you look at the first half of the season to the second half, LA was much better defensively in both second halves. So that's like a positive on one hand, but my counter to that would just be like, how could you get the second half defensive magic that you figured out of like maximizing a group that on paper is not good defensively? How can you get that from the beginning of the season? And they had a couple stretches early in the season where they were decent defensively, but for the most part, they were a bottom 10 defense for most of the season, and that's what they finished, or at least in the regular season. And I would like to see how can he squeeze the most out of the defense from the jump rather than having to figure it out in January or February. I'd also say offensively, clear, I think, correlation between running sets and actions and offensive organization and better shot quality, lower turnovers, better shot profile. And those things have just been inconsistent through his first couple of seasons. And so, like, this group to me finishing 10th, even with the injuries that they had, I do feel like they underachieved offensively in the regular season. I still think even with all the adversity and injuries they faced, this should have been a top 7 offense, in my opinion. And it really should have been a top 5, but like, I'll give them some grace with some of the injuries they had, 7th or 8th. But to me, them finishing 10th, it's a small difference, but to me, that was slight underachievement offensively. So I would, to recap, I would say better development with the young guys and trusting them more and putting them in situations where they could learn and grow better. And then trusting the bench a little bit more, particularly in fourth quarters, to just close out games and get your starters and stars rest. And then offensively and defensively figuring out why it's taken so long for the group to. Maybe it's a continuity thing, maybe it's a reps. Like there's a lot of things that go into it. So I'm not putting it entirely on the coaches. I just think that's been an interesting observation that like they have been so much better the final like 2 to 3 months of the season defensively compared to the first 3 or 4 months. And then also offensively, how can they get their offensive process to be more consistent and deliberate in general, right? And how could they do a better job of? Because I would say through the first couple years, in my opinion, JJ is much more of a defensive coach than he is an offensive coach. And now you give him a whiteboard and you give him an opportunity for an ATO or a sideline play, a baseline play. He knocks it out of the park. I think he has some of the best ATOs in the league. But in general, like the offensive process, I think could be at a higher level. So, those are the 4 things I would say. But yeah, I mean, overall, I thought it should get Coach of the Year votes, should have been on some people's ballots. I think had a case to be a top 5 Coach of the Year candidate, and I would give him an A- overall. Josh, thank you for the super chat. Jovan wanted to say thank you for another great season. Thank you. Need more like you covering the NBA. Looking forward to the offseason coverage, playoff watch parties. Yeah, I'm planning on doing that. We talked about it last night. I missed playback. I wish that was still a thing, but we should, planning on doing that for next season, but why not do it now? Definitely going to be going live and covering some of the conference finals and finals. Morning Spring, thank you for the super chat. Duran is literally Duratin. Have you watched him? I have watched him, and it's been wild, like the regression in every facet with him. It's been the finishing, the rebounding, the defense. He's had one game above 12 points the entire postseason, and that's 15 points. Like he's turned into a pumpkin, and it's wild. Now, I'm still of the mindset with Duran that I do believe there are guys who are playoff risers and playoff fallers or droppers, and he might be that, but he is still so young at 22, and he did flash such a high ceiling during the regular season. This is a guy who's an all-star and gonna almost certainly make All-NBA third team, but probably get some All-NBA second team votes, and part of that is a lot of injuries, a lot of guys were out. And so I understand that like a fully healthy season, he probably doesn't make an All-NBA team, but he had a really strong season. And I do wonder if this is a situation where he just has a really rough postseason and this is a learning situation for him. And like 3 years from now, we're talking about, oh yeah, remember that 2026 playoffs where Duran was just awful, and like, look at him now. Like I think there could be an opportunity to buy low if we're looking at it through that lens. Now there's risk in that, and you could be buying high, and you could be buying a player who's just a pumpkin. And so I'm not saying like he is a no-brainer addition potentially for the Lakers or a no-brainer retention for the Pistons, but there is a dearth of center talent beyond like the top guys, and he, on paper, was one of the top guys in the regular season. I think now with some more context, he's definitely lower on that list than he was before. But he's, I see what you're saying with the 8 in comparison, and that is concerning. I guess my pushback would just be he is so young and so still early in his career that there's maybe some hope. Like I think his baseline motor is still higher than DeAndre's, but that's like the downside here is he a guy who is more of a playoff faller? And if that's the case, then even if you're paying him 30 plus million a year, like that is concerning. Amino, thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the season. Here's to helping for Gaff and PJ. Thank you for your support. And I did respond to your comment about Gaff and PJ. Quick thoughts on that. I still think that Dallas is going to be reluctant to trade with the Lakers. The wounds are still fresh for Mavericks fans, and I think Masai's come in and said a lot of the right things, and he's acknowledged the loss of Luka and what that's meant for Mavericks fans. And I think he's won the press conference, so to speak. But I think trading with the Lakers would reopen some of those wounds, and for some Mavericks fans, I think that would be a no-go zone. So I think for if I'm Dallas, I'm trying to get away as far away as I can from the Lakers and Luka, and like of course honoring and respecting Luka for what he did for the franchise, but you don't want to just like keep having that mistake loom over your franchise, and doing a trade with the Lakers would just be reopening that conversation. So I think if I'm Dallas, whoever wants to trade for them, like maybe the Lakers blow them away with an offer that they can't refuse. But outside of that, I'm just like, I don't want to continue to have to talk about that trade. Because if you do that trade, like the next time Masai does media availability, there's going to be questions about it. And there's going to be, why did you trade with the Lakers? Like, It's just a storyline that if I'm Dallas, I just don't want to touch. So I'm skeptical of it, but who knows? We'll see. Maybe they do end up blowing them away with an offer. Lake Show Yo, thank you for the super chat. Has to be the most pressure summer in Pelinka's tenure so far. Either it will be a major failure or mediocre success with roster upgrades. Hashtag optionality. Agreed. Like, I don't know if I'd go that binary, but yeah, I mean, it does feel like it's either you're gonna build like. So if we look at, to me, what would constitute a success, like let's even throw the roster out for a second. In terms of, I'm not going to talk through like, I'd love like 2 new starters and slotting guys lower in the pecking order and having a true 10, 11, even 12 man rotation. Like that'd be great, right? But more so from like a big picture perspective, I think winning a championship next year would be a success, but I think there is some real pressure to be at least like a conference finals team, and not saying you necessarily have to beat OKC. Like again, that would be great. That is the goal. I'm not saying you're not going to the season with a defeatist attitude, but I think like the Lakers built upon last season, right? If you look at this from like a linear perspective, LA won more games this year. They went further in the playoffs. They won more playoff games than last year. So while I would say it was incremental progress in terms of 3 more wins and 3 more wins in the playoffs, that's still progress. Now, this is a championship or bust organization, as Rob Pelinka said multiple times today, that like he understands Laker fans have certain expectations for it's championship or bust every year. So through that lens, like if you don't win a championship, obviously it's a bust year. But I would say like real growth for this group would be next season, this roster wins mid to high 50s at a minimum and makes the conference finals at a minimum. And if you win 57, 58, 59 games and you lose to OKC in a 6 or 7 game series in the conference finals, that to me would be real progress of you won more games, you went deeper in the playoffs, you were more competitive with OKC, and now it's like the final level of tweaking, fine-tuning. What does the roster still need? Are we 1 player away? Are we 2 players away? Are we a skill set away? Like where are you at? And so that to me is like the pressure of next season of, I think anything less than either of those 2 things is probably a failure or at best like a neutral step, a sidestep in terms of they won 53 games. Like, and of course there's some context with injuries and stuff, right? If Luka or Austin or whoever is super injured next year, then that has to factor into the analysis to a degree. But if they don't win more games and they don't advance further in the playoffs, that is a failure in my opinion, or again, at best, like a sidestep. But you don't really want to be sidestepping at this stage of Luka's career and what you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure. This is definitely, I would say, the most pressure I've been saying since 2021. Maybe you could argue since 2022, post Russ trade or Russ first season. But yeah, I mean, I would even argue more than that. It's probably since the 2021 season, because that's coming off of losing in round 1. And we saw like that was the summer they made major changes. You lose Caruso, you lose KCP and Kuzma, you add in Russ, and they remade the roster in like a major way. So I would say since that summer, but even like factoring in at least that group, like the core of LeBron and AD had won a title together. And so like there was still a lot of pressure, but you at least had like, we've done this. And with this group, it's a new group entirely. And you also have Luka's contract situation looming over the next couple of years. So you could argue there's even more pressure depending on how you view it. So yeah, it could be like, I think it's at least the second biggest summer, but it could be the biggest. Jay Spares, thank you for the super chat. Been missing the late night gang, so just wanted to show some love. Great season. Keep up the good work, JB. Also, Rob dropping book references reminds me of the LeBron book memes. Optionality, my head hurts. Well, we've been missing you and appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate the kind words. And yeah, we got, he was referencing, that was the duality reference, was Rob talking about, making some book references there. But again, I thought it was a solid press conference overall. Jans, thank you for the super chat. What about snagging Miles Turner if they end up moving Giannis? Plus, Chris Magnon could really be key to develop as a guard defender. I really like that last point. I would like to see more of Chris Magnon and see more. Like I'm I'm really excited for the summer league this year. I think definitely more excited than the last couple of summers, but seeing what Adu looks like, seeing what Magnon looks like, seeing what Bronny looks like, seeing what the number 25 pick looks like, or if they trade up or maybe they acquire a second round pick as well. Like there's a lot to be intrigued by with the Lakers' young players and how they develop and the decisions they have to make with those guys. Miles Turner. So I would point you to last night's show. I did talk about it in depth. There was a couple super chats or a super chat and then a follow-up super chat on it. I originally said no because of the contract. I think it's 26.7, nearly 28, and then 29 point something. So he's got 3 more years left at above market value. I would say right now, like I do like to play the game sometimes where it's like, if the guy was a free agent right now, what would they command? And I think Miles Turner would probably go for the non-taxpayer MLE, like 15, 16 million. Maybe he'd go for 20 tops, but I don't think he goes for any more than that. And so that's just a negative value contract right now. You got multiple years left, and he's probably making at least $8 to $10 million more than he should be. So that is a negative value. Now, where I settled with it was if you could include because if you're taking on Miles Turner, you should be getting an asset from Milwaukee. Now, the point I made last night was if you could include Jared Vanderbilt and you don't have to do a trade where you're attaching a first to get off Vando or attaching another prominent asset, that could be interesting to me because if you're Milwaukee, Vando's making about half the amount of money as Miles Turner, actually a little bit less, and he's got 1 fewer year. So you're saving money on the years, you're saving money on the actual salary, and ideally they still throw something in, but maybe it's like a second or whatever, because you are taking on the extra year of Turner. But for the Lakers, that also allows you to keep that first, and you could use that first for another move, another transaction. Now, Miles Turner's fit with Luka is a whole other conversation where I think he's slit defensively. He is not a good rebounder for a center, and he's more of a pick and pop big than he is a pick and roll big. But the point that the person made last night, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember who made the point, but the point they made was that you could technically use Turner as more like a stretch 4 or a spacing big, and then have a 4. They were referencing Kuminga, although I'm not the biggest Kuminga fan. They were referencing, like, could you have a rim running pick and roll 4 who's an athletic finisher offensively and then defensively is a good rebounder and complements Turner defensively? That's a way to go. I still think ultimately, if you're going to have Luka, LeBron, and Austin on the books, that's already going to take you to, that's already north of $100 million and maybe even upwards of like 110, depending on the numbers. If you add in Miles Turner to that, you are now nearly, around 140 million, 135, 140 million with just those 4 players. And that does limit the rest of the roster. So I don't think, especially when you look at a Nick Claxton who's making less than Miles Turner, I'd just rather straight up have Nick Claxton, who's cheaper and better, in my opinion, and a much better fit with Luka. I think he's better defensively, more switchable. I think better rebounder, better finisher, more athletic, better lob threat. So I think you could be strategic with, could you pry certain guys from Milwaukee or whoever's the other team potentially in a Giannis deal. But for Turner, I just think he's making too much. Like, if you could use it as a salary dump in a way to be like, okay, we'd rather have Miles Turner than Jared Vanderbilt, and we're going to take on a little bit more money, but we're getting an asset from Milwaukee, and then now we're keeping the first for something else. That is maybe the scenario that intrigues me the most, but I don't think he's the cleanest Luka fit. I don't think he checks all the boxes you want from a center, and I think he's overpaid and a negative asset right now. So with all those, I would say, like, if I had to decide, I'm out on Miles Turner, but there is a very narrow pathway. If you can attach Vando, you also have a viable alternative in terms of the 4 that you're going to have in this case. Like, it doesn't really make sense with LeBron. That's like another thing here is, like, if LeBron is going to be your 4, I don't think Miles Turner makes sense. And so there's a lot of moving parts with that, but I would say it depends on the context of the roster and the opportunity cost of what you can do with that first round pick if you keep it. Rip Van Winkle, thank you for the super chat. Reminder, JJ playing Luka injured in an OKC blowout in April robbed us from a Luka postseason. Thoughts on Luka slander online for not playing? I think the Luka slander online is absolutely ridiculous. And I talked about this last night. I think part of that falls on the Lakers for not being more transparent with the timetable for him. They gave a timetable for Austin, but it really took, I mean, this is just speculation on my part, but it took that Brian Windhorst interview on the Rich Eisen show to get like immediately the following day, Luka came out and, or I think it was the Rich Eisen. I don't remember exactly what show, but I think it was Rich Eisen show. Luka came out and had the media availability in OKC to clear up, like, he's not close to returning. His original timeline was 8+ weeks. And I just think, in general, I think the lack of transparency and clarity with the Lakers and injury situations at some point does fall on the organization, because I think it sets players up to take a lot of heat publicly that just isn't really fair to them. And I have participated in the Kendrick Nunn and Gabe Vincent jokes and whatnot for their play, not for their injuries. I never joke about player injuries, but those guys got like set up to be scapegoated to some degree with some of this injury stuff. And Kendrick Nunn was day-to-day for a year. Like that's not normal. And so I think they've gotten better with it, but there still is a ways to go in terms of being transparent. Now, I also know that there's some competitive elements here. The players also have a say. Like if you go back to last postseason, Austin Reaves did not want it out there that he was playing through a toe injury. He thought it would be a competitive disadvantage that Minnesota could potentially exploit, whether it was like targeting him more defensively or stepping on his foot or just being more physical with him, whatever. Like players sometimes don't want it out there that they're playing through something or like how long they're going to be out. Because if you think about it from like Luka's perspective or the team perspective, if OKC doesn't know if they have to game plan for Luka, there is an element of like, they're expending some level of energy of like, okay, what if Luka returns game 3, game 4, game 5, whatever. And that's taking up some of their mental bandwidth in a way that if you just know Luka's out the first 2 rounds, you don't have to prepare in the same way. And it's like, all right, well, Luka's out. Like we don't have to even think about Luka until it's the conference finals if you're an opponent. So yeah, I think that the slander is ridiculous. I mean, he said last night he's still 1 to 2 weeks away from ramping up to physical contact. So he was not close. I think the unfortunate thing was we were never given a public timetable. All we had a combination of ESPN reported 4 to 6 weeks. There's a lot of Twitter doctors that were, that do analysis in the media for injuries that came out and said, well, this injury is typically 4 to 6 weeks. You had several national people reporting 4 to 6 weeks. And so that was like the public timeline that was out there. And so I understand why some people were mad, and I understand, but because of the expectations, because of the way it was framed, because of the way it was set up. But it's also like, that's where I think at some point the organization has to come out and put like Luka's out 8+ weeks, or Luka will be reevaluated in a month or whatever it is at that point, or have him talk and then come out and say it's 8+ weeks. But I thought they waited a little bit too long until it became more of a storyline than it should have been. And by the point Luka came out and said, I'm not close to returning, some fans had already made up their mind that like, oh, he's soft, he doesn't care, this, that. I think that's ridiculous. I think if he could have come back and played, he would have. I think that's how Luka is wired. And I think you could see the visible frustration. Like there's a lot of times they panned to the bench and Luka looked depressed. And it wasn't just in the OKC series. And so like I think he really wanted to be out there. But certainly when you don't have a public timetable and you have all the noise out there being like 4 to 6 weeks, that's going to color how he's characterized and how he's, analyzed by a lot of fans. And so I don't even blame some fans for being upset, because if you thought a player was supposed to be out for 4 weeks and or could return at the earliest in 4 weeks, and now it's going on 6 weeks. Like, I understand the fan urge to be mad at that. I just think it could have been clarified a little bit better. Joe, thank you for the super chat. Does LBJ sign for less if LA gets a specific guy? That's a great question that I don't have clarity on. I would say based on the precedent with LeBron of being willing to take a pay cut for certain guys in the past. If you go back a couple of off seasons and there was the whole James Harden, DeMar DeRozan, Klay Thompson, Jonas Valanciunas, it will never cease to amaze me that Jonas Valanciunas somehow hit his way out to that list with those three guys. Those are 3 first ballot Hall of Famers and Jonas Valanciunas. That I'm sure there's a list of guys that LeBron would consider taking a pay cut for, but I don't have clarity how long that list is or which name specifically. I'm sure that will come out going into, probably be reported by ESPN going into free agency. But I mean, LeBron reiterated last night that he wants to compete for championships. That's the most important thing for him outside of mentally being engaged in the process of competing and preparing every night. So I think, I think like that, his comments plus what he wanted to do previously, I would say, I think there are certain players or certain roster builds where LeBron would take a pay cut, but I don't have clarity as to which specific players or roster builds that would be. Daniel, thank you for the super chat. Under this CBA, if you can't draft or develop young talent, you're in the red. Rob's best skill set is making trades. He can't draft and is consistently missed in free agency. Replacing him should be priority number 1. Agree in the first part of this. Actually, I agree with the first 2 parts. Actually, I agree with all this. Now, I don't, until the last point, I don't think Rob's not going anywhere. I've made this point countless times before on here and on Lakers Collective. I think Rob has at least one more year where there's a lot of pressure on this summer, but I think he'll be there at least one more year. But I think your analysis is spot on. Like, you need to be able to draft, identify, and develop young talent, whether it's in the draft or undrafted market, in the G League, whatnot. And I agree that and if you think about it, I mean, Rob has an agent background. Rob is originally a very successful power agent. And what are agents best at? Negotiating. And so I think we've seen Rob's strengths have been making trades, and I will give him some credit with free agents in terms of, I think there have been several guys he's been able to sell on the opportunity of LA and taking discounts to be there. You can go back to the championship season, but you could look at guys like Malik Monk or Stanley Johnson or just different guys throughout the last few years that, Jackson Hayes, this past summer, DA, Marcus. I know a big part of that was Luka recruiting those guys, but like Rob ultimately had to close the deal and execute and find a number that made sense for both sides. So I think negotiating is his best skill, and that rears itself out more in trades than it does in anything else. You don't really negotiate in the draft, right? Like it's actually identifying the talent and picking the player. And it also doesn't help when you get rid of your scouting or most of your scouting department at the beginning of a season. But I mean, I think this is a pretty spot on analysis of Rob's strengths and weaknesses. I think one of the things that I'm still unsure of, and I've made this point on here and on Lakers Collective too, like I just don't really know what his basketball ethos is. I think when you think about the best organizations over the last 10, 15 years, the Golden States, the San Antonios, the Miamis, the Bostons, the Oklahoma Cities, they all, like, none of them are perfect. None of them have batted 1,000 with their drafts, their signings, their trades, their moves, but they all have a core ethos and they all have a type of player that fits with it. And again, it doesn't mean they bat 1,000 with that. It doesn't mean every move is adding that type of player. But in general, we know about Heat culture, and it's like you got to be like Spo and Pat are the top dogs there, and you got to get in line with the culture. You got to be in a certain amount of shape. They're going to the conditioning, the hard practices, the constantly testing your body fat. Like that, there is something to Heat culture and what it means to be a Heat player. With Golden State, it's Steve Kerr and the joy of basketball and playing, a pass first, very intricate offensive system with the back cuts and the split cuts and all the different ways that they function offensively around Steph and Draymond. And that's a very high IQ. You have to have, pass first, team first mentality. And the guys that have struggled there, as we've seen with a Kuminga or whoever, like those guys don't check that box and like very much are not Warriors players. San Antonio and OKC, I think are more, kind of similar, but they're very much like character first guys. And it's how many times do we see like San Antonio, OKC, they do not put up with the whole you're getting into trouble or controversy off the court. There's no like we're getting, it's like the opposite of the Clippers, where the Clippers will sign anybody regardless of their character. OKC and San Antonio don't do that. They're very much like you got to be you got to fit a certain profile first and foremost. Like that's the non-negotiable, right? Boston, they're obviously more analytical and a little bit more modern with like trying to go more 3-and-D wings and shooting bigs. And, they've had their approach over the last decade or so. So I say all that to say, like, I think the one thing that the Lakers really need to crystallize here this summer and moving forward is what is a Lakers player? I think there has been some real growth with the culture. There's been some real growth with JJ as a coach and what he's trying to do. But like, what is a Lakers player? What does that look like? What is that like? If you close your eyes, like, and you think about what a Lakers player is, what is that eventually going to be? And I think that's even bigger than Luka, right? Because that ideally should, like, if you think about the Heat culture, I mean that's been going on for a long time. But if you want to say like starting with, it was like, Wade and Shaq and that, I mean, we got to give big shout out to Alonzo Mourning, but like, that kind of early to mid 2000s era has really parlayed its way into now. But you had so many different iterations of like that group with then the Heatles into Jimmy Butler and Bam into like the current version, right? And Golden State has gone through multiple iterations. San Antonio has gone through multiple iterations, but the culture is the biggest thing. And like, of course, you need the superstar, you need the all-time player to win championships, but you also need a defining culture, defining basketball philosophies and traits. And I don't know that the Lakers currently have that or have had that. The last few years, the biggest thing has been combo guards. Like that's been the biggest thing. A bunch of combo guards. Kendrick Nunn, Gabe Vincent, JHS, Dalton, Nick Smith Jr., Kobe Buffkin. Like in terms of identifying talent and liking certain types of players, it's a lot of like guys who make great YouTube mixtapes and highlight tapes. But they got to figure that out. That's a big thing for them. Golden 24, thank you for the super chat. Need to retain Smart and one of Rui or Luke. We need two starters and bring Smart off the bench. How realistic is it improving without losing key guys? I agree with everything you're saying here. I would say Marcus and Rui in particular. I think if you're putting Rui and Luke in the general bucket of elite shooter, a good offensive player with some real defensive limitations, and like is a guy you ideally are hiding or at least not using as like a stopper defensively. Rui is just, I think he's a better offensive player. I think he's a better defensive player. He's also 6'8", 230, 235 pounds. There's a physicality element with Rui that I don't think he consistently leverages and could do a better job with that. But I mean, comparing, like, Rui looks like, Shaq out there compared to Luke in terms of the physicality and the presence out there, and not being moved the way that Luke can be moved by guys off the dribble or just in the paint and whatnot. So I would definitely prioritize the 6'8", mid 40% sharp shooter, 3-point shooter in the regular season and 50% 3-point shooter in the playoffs. Like I would prioritize that guy. And then, of course, Marcus as well. I would agree that my ideal slotting would be adding, in a perfect world for me, and I'm going to continue to think about this and refine this, but in general, I would say a perfect world would be if you had your Kessler, Duran, Claxton, Jared out, like, pick Isaiah Hartenstein, but whatever, your center upgrade, and you get a real two-way wing who is ideally as good as Marcus defensively, but if not, at least like pretty close to Marcus defensively, but is a step up offensively as a shooter, as a scoring threat, as like a low usage player who's maybe not as mistake prone. That to me would be like, if you go into next season with a new starting center, a new two-way wing, LeBron, Luka, Austin, and then your primary bench is Marcus, Rui, potentially even DA. And like, I would be okay with DA in a backup bench role where you're not dependent on him, but maybe DA or Jackson as your backup. And then, I think that's a solid top 8. You need to find that does Adu pop, and is Adu part of the rotation? Are you signing somebody with a room exception? Are you adding a couple minimum guys that fit the rotation? Like, I would say that's a solid 8-man starting point that I think that top 8 is competitive with, not quite as deep as OKC, but I don't think you're building a roster as deep as OKC. I don't think that's possible, at least in one summer. So like, putting OKC aside, I think you could put that top 8 against, like, if not many teams, for as shallow as the Lakers roster is currently, if you find a way to slot Marcus and Rui as your 2 best bench players, like, those are 2 high level bench players that, compared to other teams, like not a lot of teams. I mean, I guess like Minnesota has Reed and DeSumo coming off the bench at full strength, or San Antonio, depending on the iteration of the group, could have high level bench guys. But aside from OKC, I think that would put LA in a class of like, their top 7 is very, very strong, and not as strong as maybe OKC or San Antonio, but like as strong, if not stronger, than just about everybody else. And then it's about building out the rest of the roster. In terms of how realistic is it to improve without losing the key guys, it depends who you deem a key guy. If you're okay with losing Luke, then I think it's like semi-realistic. If you're okay with losing one of Rui or Marcus, then I think it's realistic, because I think it is difficult to keep Austin, LeBron, Marcus, Rui, and add to the roster. If you lose one of those final 2 guys, I think you do have some flexibility to add more to the roster, but at the same time, you're losing something. So like, for example, if you lose Rui and you add a 2-way wing, you're theoretically getting better defensively, higher motor player, maybe more athletic player, but you're losing a lot on the offensive end, shooting wise. With Marcus, it could be a similar thing where like, maybe you do add the 3-and-D player, but maybe they're not as good as Marcus defensively. They're not the type of leader Marcus is, that they're not the type of defensive communicator that Marcus is. And then offensively, probably not the ball handler or passer that Marcus is. So if you lose one of those 2 guys, like, that's a big loss that LA is going to have to figure out how to offset. But I mean, they're going to lose key guys regardless of, I would say like Luke and DA are lesser key guys, but you could still classify them as key guys. But yeah, I mean, I'd be pretty surprised if Marcus, Rui, and Luke are all back. I just don't. I think if they're all back, it's unlikely they've made real additions to the roster. Cage Britt, thank you for the super chat. What do you think of Adu's defensive potential this season? I have left the season encouraged by Adu's defensive potential. I think we saw like his defense against Jaylen Brown in that Boston game back in Boston in early December. But then also some of his defense more recently as like a small ball, either at the 4 or the 5. I think he's still just like a ball of clay that is being molded right now. And we're starting to see some of that potential and what that can be. But I think what Adu is going to look like 2 years from now is dramatically different from what he looks like right now. But But I mean, the athleticism, like I would say that the two things I've been most impressed by have been the athleticism, like really pops in a real way. He's not quite I would say even comparing him to the Thompson twins, I think he's more of a vertical athlete than even the Thompson twins are, but they've got that like quick twitch, just absurd speed, agility, athleticism that is just, as LeBron has said in the past, like alien like. But his athleticism really pops in a way that, it's easy to say like someone's athletic or whatever, but with Adu, it like really stands out where every time he stepped on the floor, you're like, oh, this is the best athlete on the floor, or like maybe the second best athlete, depending on who else is on the floor. And that's something that I think can translate in a really big way and can be an advantage for him moving forward. And then the rebounding. I think the rebounding, the offensive rebounding and the defense, I mean, his defense rebounds, he's almost hitting his head on the rim, like a lot of them. That like is rebounding number. So I think to me, he's the spiritual successor to Vando of what Vando was supposed to be for this group, but he's a cheaper alternative. And I think he's going to be a better offensive player than Vando was. So yeah, I think he's, and defensively, I mean, peak Vando a few years ago was a really, really high level defender who was an all defense candidate. So saying Adu's just going to be better than that is like, that's a pretty high bar to clear if you're talking like peak Vando. But I think like if you look at Vando the last couple of years, I don't think he's been the same defensively, and Adu could be a better version than that version of Vando. But yeah, I mean, I think he's really raw offensively, needs to, times felt very sped up, and I don't even blame him for that because he's a second round pick who barely played and was thrust into, can you play against Houston or OKC, or late in the season, whatever. That I do not fault him at all for that, but it should be a big point of emphasis for LA this summer, developing him in summer league, developing him next season. And I think there's some real upside there to be at least a rotation player who's like a really good multi-positional defender, a high level rebounder, and then we'll see what he could turn into offensively. Siskel, thank you for the super chat. Multiple ball handling / elite shot making is not talked about enough, regardless of position. It's not as bland as get two-way 3-point shooting wings. Yeah, I mean, I tried to allude to this earlier when last night and today when I've talked about just more skill in general, and JJ's point about having guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot, and how that sounds reductive or just overly simple, but that's really important. Like the Lakers, aside from, like he was talking about that in reference to Luke specifically. So it's like, okay, you have Luka, LeBron, Austin, Marcus, and Luke. Those 5 guys can all dribble, pass, and shoot. Beyond those 5, everyone else on the roster had at least one limitation in one of those regards in a meaningful way. And so that is something that the Lakers are going to have to address, I think, with, it's not just youth athleticism defense, it's also skill of like, and that's where it was encouraging to hear them talk about game processors and like high IQ players. Like, I think they could use some more high IQ players. I think they could use guys who not necessarily like high usage guys making all these plays and stuff, but if it is end of a possession, like with OKC, for example, and again, they're like the example right now and not necessarily a fair example, but like they're the standard. It would feel like if the Lakers had a really good possession, then like Alex Caruso finds a way to create a shot and cans a 3, or even stuff like relocating off the ball, I think is a really underrated skill that the Lakers weren't quite as good at some as some of the best teams or elite offenses. So there's a lot within this that I totally agree with, but having more ball handlers and elite shot making, whether it's actual shooting or just tough shot making, or like I agree. Now, I think it is easier sometimes to put simpler or more basic labels on things, right? And that's where like 3-and-D wing is a very blanket term that in general is just like, you don't need the ball offensively. Offensively, you're an off-ball player who basically just spots up and spaces the floor and is like at least a league average shooter. And then defensively, ideally, you're like a high-level defender who can defend multiple positions. Like that's the general 3-and-D archetype. Now, I think the reason that is referenced so much, particularly with Luka, is because like that there's a proof of concept of that position has worked next to Luka in 2022, in 2024, and with how ball dominant Luka can be and how much of a usage monster he could be, you need play finishers. And those are guys that can hit, catch and shoot, spot up threes at a high level, can cut like a Derek Jones Jr., someone like that, can cut into space and finish at a high level, catch and finish. And so there are a multitude of ways to break it down, a multitude of ways to, I think like ideally you want as well-rounded of players as possible. And that's kind of what I was trying to make the point with OKC is like they have guys in specific roles, but occasionally they can show you that they bust out, oh, I can do this. And you didn't necessarily know they could do that. But that speaks to them getting like more well-rounded guys, but then fitting them into a particular role that suits what the team needs. But then it's like 5 seconds left on the shot clock. It doesn't matter what the team needs. It's like you need to go get a bucket. You need to create a high-level shot. So whether that's breaking your man off the dribble and creating a lob opportunity or a kick-out pass, or it's breaking your man off the dribble and creating a shot for yourself, that's a high-level skill that imagine just put different guys in different scenarios or even just a couple of the back-end rotation guys. Give Jake LaRavia or Jared Vanderbilt the ball with 5 seconds left on the shot clock. You do not feel good about that. You don't feel like a high-level shot is going to be created. And if you could find versions of Jake and Vando defensively who can create a shot or make a play with 5 seconds left on the shot clock, that would go a long way in building out a better two-way group. So like that's what you have to identify is like ultimately you're going to have guys who play certain roles. And I think most of the time spots 3 and 4 on a Luka team are going to be more of catch and shoot guys and they're going to be more of off-ball guys. But do you have guys that can extend an advantage, create an advantage, and finish with an advantage? And like that is something the Lakers do have to an extent, but could certainly have at a higher level. Rip Van Winkle, thank you for super chat. How do you contextualize JJ being the reason Luka had season-ending injury? And hypothetical, if Luka wasn't injured and we stay at 3 seed, do we win in round 1, round 2? I don't think it's fair to put the injury entirely on JJ. There was the reporting last night from The Athletic that Luka and Austin, and of course, there's going to be a lot of he said, she said, that there's going to be differing accounts of how things went down, but that Luka and Austin, like both were given the opportunity to not play in that second half and they both wanted to play. And now at some point, I do think you need to step in as either coaching staff or medical staff and be like, hey, we don't think you should play. Like, it's not worth the risk. Like the game was over. And they say the story that like, the Lakers had confidence that based on their 16-2 stretch that they could come back from down 31 at the half to OKC. Like, I don't really believe that. I don't care how confident you are. Like a 31-point halftime lead with how bad they'd played against them all season. I just don't see where any sense of optimism comes in that regard. I think what was probably more how they felt was like, let's at least make this more competitive in the third quarter. Let's cut this to 20. Let's cut this to 15. And like, we're probably not going to win the game or almost certainly not going to win the game, but can we at least have like a more competitive showing and then go out at least feeling a little better? But I mean, clearly was the wrong decision. I think some people blame like directly for them playing. If you want to assign any blame, I would assign more season-long blame in terms of overextending the minutes and overdoing the minutes, and that cumulatively adding up to a point where the body started to break down a bit. But I don't think it's fair to put that all on JJ or even most of that on JJ. My understanding was it was a collaborative effort in terms of like, JJ's not making a lot of call. It's more on the medical staff. Like it's not JJ's not saying like, hey, this guy needs to play through this injury. That's not how a coaching situation works. It's the player has to be cleared medically, and both Luka and Austin were cleared medically to return. And then it just ended up being the disaster scenario in both situations. If Luka wasn't injured, the Lakers would have stayed the 3 seed. I think they at least they would have gotten the Dallas win, in my opinion, and they would have been the 3 seed. Do they win round 1? So they would have played Minnesota round 1, most likely. Like, I believe in the butterfly effect. So if you do change some things, it is going to have some ripple effects, right? But let's just say the seed, like it's Denver's 4, Lakers are 3, Houston stays 5, Minnesota stays 6. I think they would have been slight favorites over Minnesota, and then we also have the context of like, does Ant still get re-injured in the same way that he does? And like, there is a butterfly effect here of like, is Ant just like compromised, but available, or does Ant get injured and missed? Like, does Dante DiVincenzo still tear his Achilles? Because I think those are 2 big injuries that would have swung that series. Whereas like the version when we saw Minnesota went up 3-1 against Denver, like Minnesota is a playoff rising team. I know there's people that looked at the season series like, oh, they swept the Wolves, like they would have easily won. Like, I don't think I think if the Lakers win that series, it's at least a 6 or 7 game series. And I think Minnesota would have had a real chance to win. But in this hypothetical, I will give the Lakers a very competitive series win over Minnesota. But I do think the lack of depth and playable players, the Lakers were barely at 7 playable players by the end of this series. You add Luka, that's obviously you'll barely add 8 playable players, but it is more tenable with the top of the roster. I think they likely lose in a competitive series to San Antonio in round 2, but you could talk me into potentially beating San Antonio in round 2. And then I think they would have for sure lost to OKC in the conference finals. I think with no J-Dub, I could have seen it being a 6-game series. With J-Dub, I think it's a 5-game series. And I mean, OKC is just at a different level. Grant White, thank you for the super chat. When's the last time a team won a chip with 2 non-above average defending guards? Either Luka or AR has to go. Trade either for 2 to 3 really good starters. Trying to think on. I would reframe this conversation a little bit here because I don't consider Luka a defensive guard. I consider Luka a defensive forward. So through this lens, I would say, or through the reframe, I would say, when was the last time someone won with 2? I would say average to below average defenders in the rotation. And off the top of my head, I mean, I immediately think about Denver, and Denver won with Jokic and MPJ and Jamal Murray. Their starting lineup was propped up by Aaron Gordon and KCP. Now, Jokic is 7 feet, MPJ is 6'10". They had a monster front line. Really good rebounding front line, really long front line. And I also thought Jokic was better that season defensively than he was this season. So that would probably be the exception. Otherwise, I'm trying to think, like not 2024 Celtics, not 2025 Thunder, not 2022 Warriors, not 2021 Bucks, not 2020 Lakers, not 2019 Raptors, not the Warriors, maybe the Cavs kind of with, I think Kyrie was a playoff riser defensively a bit, but I mean, you had Kevin Love. You weren't like crushing it with like the J.R. Smith, Kevin Love, like, but you had LeBron James. So, prime LeBron James is a little bit different. Yeah, I mean, it's few and far between. Like it's not very common, I would say. So, I mean, there is a real fact, but this is why I then say like the rest of the roster basically has to be lights out, and that's where even guys like Rui or Luke, for as great as they are offensively and as shooters, if you like ideally your role players, you have your stars, and every star has some sort of limitation. We can go star by star, and there is a limitation and a weakness that you have to try to protect with your star. And the key is building a roster that complements your star, but also protects the weakness. So in the case of like Rui and Luke, for example, I think both players complement Luka and Austin, but I don't think either player protects them. And that's the distinction. Whereas Marcus, I think, is much closer to he complements them and he also protects them to a degree of like he was by far the Lakers' best defender all season. The defense was much better with him on the floor. He was the defensive captain, defensive leader, defensive communicator, and you need guys like that. So that's where I don't think the build, I think the build can work, but I think you need to build the roster in a specific way. And I am a little concerned that the Lakers, even if you have 2 to 3 additional okay to bad defenders, I think that tilts it way too much where like you just don't have the ceiling or floor defensively. So I think LA's got to find a way to address that. And that's where it just gets a little complicated with some of the role players and how they fit. Now, in terms of trading them, I mean, they're not, I mean, if you're trading Luka, you might as well rebuild. You're not like building a contender trading Luka because you just need a player at a certain level and you're just not getting that player back. Austin, to trade Austin, it's either a sign and trade, which he would have to agree to, or you would have to trade him at some point during the season. So they're not, I mean, it's not really an option this summer. So I think the move really is limiting the defensive liabilities around them, in my opinion, and propping them up with high level defenders. But we'll see if they can do that. Karl Marx, thank you for the super chat. I'm okay with overpaying to get rid of players who don't fit our roster and adding young talent who does. Example, DK, Jake Van Noen, 2 firsts from Max and Gafford. Could be talked to trading all 3 firsts for that. I would not trade all 3 firsts for that, but I would do 2 firsts because I would view it as a first to get off Vando and a first to add Max and Gafford. I would like to see what other options are out there. Like if it comes down to it and you have to use one of those assets for just, you know, I don't know, Hartenstein or Dort or like there's other guys that I think could potentially shake loose that out, you know, someone mentioned last night on the stream, could you get in on a 3-team trade with Milwaukee and Portland? And could you pry someone out of Portland? Like if you could pry Tamani Kamara, that would obviously be amazing for the Lakers. And I would use 1 or 2 firsts in that deal to get Tamani Kamara on this team. So I'm with you. I mean, I've been advocating for the Lakers to dump guys for multiple off seasons, and they just have not been doing it. It's not been part of their roster building DNA. But and then there's also the factor of like, is Dallas even willing to trade and play ball here? That I just don't know. But I would say 3 firsts is too much, but I would consider 2 firsts. And ideally, I would say I think the firsts matter here. And in my opinion, I would rank the firsts from the Lakers' perspective. 2033, number 1, most valuable. 2031, number 2, most valuable. A bit of a gap, and then 2026, this upcoming pick. And the reason I would value this pick less than those 2 is just because you don't know where you're going to be at in 5 to 7 years. That's a long time away. We see championship windows close very quickly in the modern NBA, and teams have to move on. So if you're in a situation where, for whatever reason, this core does not work, and you eventually have to pivot to some degree, losing those picks when you're pivoting would be, I think, a death blow for the franchise in the early 2030s. Whereas now, I still think you should prioritize keeping the pick unless there's like a no-brainer transaction to make. But this, especially it being a 25th pick compared to you don't know what the future pick is, there's still value in the 25th pick, but I think there's the 2030 picks are going to be very valuable. So I would say if I'm doing this, I probably prioritize like 1 future pick and the 2026 pick in this trade. I would not want to give up. I think the 2031 and 33s are too valuable to give up for guys who profile as starters, but you could also make a case for more like high-end bench guy level players. So, but I do think it's important to get off of the Vando contract. And then, again, you could look at it as like a first for Vando and then DK and Jake. If you took out the Vando in the first part of this and it's just DK and Jake and a first for Max and Gafford, yeah, you would do that in a heartbeat. And then you're also getting off of the Vando contract and there's a cost for that. So I think that makes some sense. 3 first though is too much for me. Cage Brit, I got a few more here and then I'm wrapping. Think of a super chat. Non-basketball question. Are you ready for May 15th with the ice cube emoji? Yes, I am. And I've been thinking about maybe doing a stream for my instant reaction to Iceman, but I've been going through the archive and getting ready for May 15th. That's going to be a very fun evening. And I have a whole process with how I listen to Drake albums, and I'm really excited for that. Villa, thank you for the super chat. Priority should be figuring out what happens with Braun, right? That decides how much cap flexibility we have. Yes. To a large degree, yes. Now, the complication or limitation here is just that I don't think LeBron is going to make a decision anytime soon. The way that LeBron has often operated has been waiting until like right before free agency to make his decision, or even waiting into free agency to make a decision. So that's going to be, it's like LeBron operates on his own timeline. He deserves to operate on his own timeline, but the Lakers are obviously going to have to navigate that. And it's going to be a potential complicating factor within all this. But maybe LeBron makes the decision very quickly and that would be in LA's best interest. But yeah, I mean, LeBron and his situation is probably the biggest domino, because as I continue to say with Austin Reaves, because I think there's still this, I saw, not going to call anybody out, but there's a clip from a national show today where they talked about, well, the Lakers can't pay Austin Reaves all this money because it's going to affect who they sign in free agency. And that's just factually incorrect. Austin Reaves, the whole concept of LA having cap space is still with Austin Reaves on the books on that $22 million cap hold. And then once they make their moves, they're going to go above the cap and re-sign Austin to a larger number. But Austin, I've been making this point now for the past month. And I feel like people have not processed it or still like I'm not seeing people make this point. Austin's contract has nothing to do with the Lakers cap sheet. He's going to be on the $22 million cap hold. And whether Austin makes $45 million or Austin makes $25 million, that $20 million gap will matter in the future with how LA is able to build the roster and his trade value and all that stuff. So I'm not saying it does not matter at all, but for the specific or through the specific lens of this roster and how this roster looks, and like him making 45 versus 25 has absolutely zero impact on this year's roster, at least in the summer and how they build it. Like they can build whatever roster they want and still keep Austin on that cap hold and then go over and keep Austin with his bird rights. So that continues to be like this misinformation that's out there of, well, if they sign Austin for 40, they're going to lose Rui or they're going to lose. No, whether they keep Rui and Luke is entirely dependent. Now, sure, could they just not sign Austin and let Austin walk and then go and keep their own free agents? Technically, yes, but that's not how this is going to go down. And the Lakers value Austin above all of those guys. So they're going to retain Austin. The ultimate number is important. I'm not diminishing the importance of the number, but for this year's roster, it's not if they sign Austin to 30 million instead of 45, they're going to add a $15 million player. That's not how this works. They're going to make all their moves, then retain Austin, and that will just be going above the cap and be entirely independent of what they did in free agency. Now, LeBron, that's a big swing factor because if LeBron resigns, that's a chunk of the cap space gone. If LeBron retires or leaves, that's a chunk of cap space added. So LeBron is a big swing factor in terms of the cap space, because with LeBron, it will be based on his cap space and his number that will have a big influence on LA's flexibility. With Austin, it's an entirely different situation. That's just how cap holds work. Morning Spring, thank you for the super chat. A dude too big and slow as a 3 with the right conditioning. I think he would have the perfect 3 build, hire Phil Handy back to develop his 3-point shot. Yeah, I don't think Adu is a 3. I think Adu. I mean, right now, I think Adu's actual like best position is a small ball 5. I think his next best position is the 4, and then his next best position is the 3. And I say small ball 5 because of just the lack of a 3-point shot. And I mean, it's just not there at all. And I mean, like there's some very clear like analogs with Adu and Vando. I think Adu is a little bit. I mean, he's more athletic than Vando, and I think there's a there's like kind of like this puppy dog energy with Adu, and it feels like he's like he's just kind of like bouncing around out there, and you're just like overly excited in like a positive way. But I think right now, I mean, it's a very similar issue to Vando of. I've made this point before with Vando. Like Vando is a 5 offensively. The issue is that, I mean, you can go small with Vando, and the Lakers have done that, but they often don't, and it's often in a double big look. But then the issue, or him playing next to a 5, the issue is DA and Jackson are also 5s offensively, so those guys can't space. Now you have 2 non-spacers, and then if you add in Jake LaRavia or you add in even Marcus, depending on the night, now you're running into a situation where you have like 3 non-spacers on the floor. That's really tough to navigate. And so Adu right now, I would say, I would really classify him as like a 4.5, but the goal is for him to develop offensively to be able to play more than 3. Now, it's a little complicated because I think when we talk defensive or when we talk positions, I think people think it's offensive. Actually, it's more defensive where it matters, right? Because if you think about Denver, for example, right? And actually Denver has like multiple examples within their rotation, but like Jokic is functionally their point guard, right? Like Murray can also, Murray will bring the ball up, but in terms of the primary passer, the primary assist guy, it's Jokic. Jokic is functionally Denver's point guard, but he's a center. And then you have the inverse of that, which is like Bruce Brown is functionally Denver's like more of a 4 in some configurations, but sometimes he does bring the ball up, and he's also like 6'3". And so like offensively, we've gone to a positionalist system where you can be a center who's your point guard, or you can be a guard who's like operating like a big man. Defensively is often where the positions come in. However, I think the one exception to this is wings who can't shoot often kind of become big men offensively. And like Adu checks this box, Vando checks this box. If you can't shoot as a perimeter guy, you sort of get slotted up a position or 2. And that's where, again, I would say Adu defensively can be a 3 or a 4 or a 5. Again, depending on the lineup. Offensively is more of a 5, and the Lakers are just going to have to navigate that. He's going to have to get better offensively. And then final 2 here from 7 Day Sports Pod. Thank you for the super chat. Love your show, but honestly, I've watched the Lakers for 9 years. They don't have a chance with Luka and AR. I am trading AR. Jake and DA are jokes. We'll see what happens. Like, I think the thing with the one thing I keep coming back to and trying to ground the AR conversation in is that it's much easier said than done to trade Austin because he's a free agent. And what I have advocated for going back to last summer when we started having these Austin talks was see how the season goes, see how he develops, see how he fits with Luka, see how he looks in the playoffs. And I think we got a pretty incomplete picture because of his injuries, because of Luka's injuries. But if you actually judge when Luka and Austin played together, they were pretty dominant together. Now, were there limitations against some of the best teams in the league? For sure. Do I look at the OKC matchup and have concern? For sure. So I'm not dismissing that. But in totality, Austin and Luka won a lot of games together and had a pretty dominant net rating together and on-off together. And we didn't get a second reference point in the playoffs. So we're sort of trying to like piece it together and project it. But unless you find an incredible trade for Austin that he signs off on, because that's the key, he has to sign off on a trade. Your options are either let him walk for nothing or retain him, and then you could flip him in the future. But the trading Austin, I feel like, I'm not saying you talk about it this way, but I have seen it talked about as like, oh, well, let's just flip Austin this summer. Like that's not, Austin has to sign off on that. And I don't think he's just going to go anywhere, for the money. I think he would and wants some agency in where he ends up. So if it's like, if the Lakers like, we're trading you, then I think Austin's just going to say peace and go sign somewhere else. And even if it's maybe not as much money as he could get from the Lakers or in a trade, I think he'd rather have the agency and play for less money than go play in a situation he does. Like, so if you think about, I don't know, Milwaukee, the Giannis trade, or New Orleans is, another place. Like, I don't think he's just going to be like, let me go to Milwaukee, let me go to New Orleans. I think he's going to want to have some agency and pick the city, pick the team, pick the situation. So that's why I think trading Austin, if the Lakers get to that point, which again, Rob Pelinka spoke glowingly of Austin Reaves today and was like very excited to talk about Austin Reaves and retaining him. I don't think the Lakers are anywhere near that point, but if they eventually get to that point, I think it's going to be next season at the earliest and not this summer. I am going to wrap here though. I got some radio I have to do right now, but after that, your boy's taking a little break, and I'll probably be back tomorrow. But if not, you guys might not hear from me from 24 hours. And I will be doing God knows what. And after that, I will definitely be back by Thursday. But appreciate you all for rocking with me for over a couple hours here. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to the late night gang.